gates slide open. Sunlight cuts through the dust. His first step could be his last. Close your eyes. Feel the heat of the sun on your skin. Hear the silence, heavier than the cheers that are yet to come. Thousands of gazes held breath. Two men, one arena. Steel against steel. Life against life. Gladiatorial games were carefully orchestrated performances. Political theater. Powerful propaganda. And sometimes, a chance at glory in exchange for sweat, scars, and the eternal tension between life and death. In this whisper of the past, I take you into the world of the gladiator. Slowly, gently. Welcome to Historical ASMR. Today, we will walk through the shadows of the Colosseum, where every fight was a story and every breath could be your last. There are stories that are whispered in the shadow of the past. Do you want to keep hearing them? Subscribe before they disappear forever. We travel back to the 3rd century before Christus. Gladiators. In our imagination, they are bloodthirsty fighters, wild men, trapped in a fight to the death, purely for the enjoyment of a Roman audience. But behind the scenes, hidden beneath layers of sand and time, lies another truth. A truth that whispers of strategy, honor, and money. The origin of the gladiators. It's a story that hides in the shadows, deep in the early Roman Republic, around the 3rd century before Christus. In the beginning, the fights were not entertainment. They were rituals, bloody offerings to the dead. This battle was not for glory, but to guide the souls of the deceased to the afterlife. It started as a monus, a fight between slaves, prisoners of war, or people who risked their lives for a master who wouldn't even remember them. They didn't fight for their own honor, but for the honor of the dead, who hadn't yet let them go. Slowly, very slowly, it changed. The fights were no longer sacrifices, but spectacles, a way to entertain the elite. Emperors, like Augustus, gave the orders, and so the arena was born. Great stone arenas, like the Colosseum, were filled with the scent of blood and sand, where the dead, the gladiators, did not truly live, but merely survived. And who were the gladiators? People from the shadows of society, slaves, criminals, people who sought freedom and found it only in battle. They were trained, sharpened like knives, their bodies made for combat, for their lives, and for their death. Sometimes, victory was nothing more than a delay of their doom. The arena was their world, their prison, and their fight, their battles, would never be forgotten. Most gladiators died young. Many never saw 30. Some fell in their first fight, others after dozens, not always by the sword, but by infection, fatigue, or the crowd's will. Growing old, that was the rarest victory of all. And yet, they didn't just fight for survival. Gladiators fought for profit, for prestige, for the public's hunger for spectacle. In ancient Rome, a gladiator was more than a fighting machine. He was an investment, a possession, a living attraction. Think of a celebrity, but one who could die at any moment, especially wealthy Romans, senators, generals, owned their own ludus, a training school for gladiators. Just like horses or chariots, These men were valuable assets. The most beloved fighters were even insured, as if they were works of art, sometimes for thousands of sestertii. Every strike they delivered, every wound they received, could either increase their value or destroy it. But that value wasn't just in muscle or fighting style. The Roman audience loved spectacle, drama. Each gladiator was given a stage name, a character, an archetype, the Retiarius, with his net and trident, the Murmillo, heavily armed with helmet and shield. They were not anonymous fighters. They were characters in a living theater, designed to evoke something: fear, hope, admiration. And the Romans, they gambled, they cheered, they whispered their names in alleys. Some gladiators became legends, no longer slaves, but icons, an investment that kept paying out, as long as he stayed alive. When you hear gladiators, you picture blood, sand, a thumb turned down. But that image is not the full story. It's mostly myth. Gladiatorial fights were not always to the death. No. Most fights did not end with a fatal blow. Gladiators were expensive. Training took time. Gold. Blood. A dead gladiator was a loss of capital. Most fights ended with surrender, until one of the two raised his finger. A gesture, so quiet, so small, that it could save a life. A thumbs down. The Romans used the gesture pollis verso, with a turned thumb, but no one is sure what exactly it meant. Some say that an upturned thumb actually signified death. Others argue that it referred to the direction of the sword, a shuffling crowd, whispering senators, and then silence, because the audience had power. But the final decision, that lay with the editor, the organizer of the games. Sometimes he spared the life of a loser. Sometimes he did not. And then there's the idea that gladiators were barbarians, uncivilized beasts. But that's another misconception. The best gladiators were super athletes, strict regimen, daily training, tactical fighting, discipline, silence. They ate a diet of beans and barley. Barley eaters, people mocked them, but they were fit, strong, sharpened, and many chose it. Free men, volunteers. Some saw it as a path to glory, or even freedom. A chance to become immortal in the crowd's memory. A life in the sand for a name in history. In the cold shadow of the Colosseum, where the blood of thousands mixed with the sand, there unfolded not only spectacle, but a mirror of Roman society. Shh. Listen. The arena was a stage of class and power, and not every gladiator was a slave. Most people whisper about slaves, convicts, and prisoners of war fighting their fate with iron weapons. But there was also another class, free men, Roman citizens, even, who signed up voluntarily, captured by fame, by money, or simply by the addictive thirst for violence. Gladiators were paradoxical. On one hand, property. On the other hand, superstars. A successful gladiator could become wealthier than a senator. With his face on oil lamps, his name whispered in brothels and markets, and women wearing amulets made from his sweat. Yes, literally from his sweat. Think about that. But above all this violence, high in the stands, sat another Rome, the elite, the emperors, the senators with golden rings and cold eyes. For them, the arena was not a fight, but a show, a tool of power, a way to numb the masses with blood instead of bread. Panem et circenses, bread and circuses. That was the motto, and it worked. They kept the people obedient with spectacle, while they pulled the strings in marble palaces. POV. You wake up, not in a bed, but on a straw mat, soaked with sweat, and sometimes blood. You hear the first crack of the whip before the sun rises. Training begins, whether you're injured or not. Gladiators didn't live. They survived. Every day, over and over again. Their days began in the Ludus, the Gladiator school, a place that sounded like hell, but where discipline, strength, and fear were sharpened into weapons. Their bodies, molded like marble, but inside, broken, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly. And no, they didn't eat like beasts, not how you think. Most gladiators were given a diet rich in legumes, barley, and ash. Yes, ash from burnt wood, not for taste, for calcium, stronger bones, less chance of fractures when the steel hit their ribs. They were mockingly called hordearii, barley eaters. But don't be mistaken, that barley kept them alive. And then there was brotherhood. Yes, brotherhood. Because despite the blood, the dead, the death, something stronger than fear arose. Loyalty. They fought together, against the same fate. And if you knew you might die beside him the next morning, you didn't call him an enemy. Sometimes, they even buried each other, with honor and a tear. But don't be mistaken, the training wasn't just physical. Mental control was deadlier than any weapon. You learned how to fall, how to manipulate the crowd, how to die when the time came. And yes, sometimes, even that was practiced. The life of a gladiator was not a life. It was a slow death, in chapters, between strikes, between cheers, between tears, and every scar told a story that no one asked for, but everyone watched. In the arena, he was a beast, a killer, a legend. But outside the arena, he was desired, worshipped, or used. The gladiator. Sweat, blood, strength, sex, women, wealthy Roman women, fluttered around the ludus, with veils, eyes full of hunger, and hands that whispered. Some were smuggled in at night, to taste the flesh that might be dead by tomorrow. And yes, sometimes gladiators became lovers, but never loved ones. Never. Because love, that was a luxury he could not afford. There are myths about gladiators who found love, who tried to escape, together, to flee from chains of steel and desire. But the reality, much colder. Their bodies were exploited, not just in the arena, but also in bed, for pleasure, for power, for fame. They were flesh, not people. And yet, among themselves, sometimes something else arose. Not lust, but connection, tenderness, between men who knew they would die together. Some historians whisper about relationships between gladiators, hidden, silenced, but real. In the darkness of their sleeping quarters, they shared warmth and silence, and sometimes tears. But the public saw only the myth, the sex god, the muscle bundle, the manus gladiatorum, the hand of the sword. They sang songs about their favorite fighters, wrote their names on walls, and sold their sweat, packaged in amphorae, not figuratively, literally. In the shadowed depths of the Colosseum, battles unfolded that went far beyond man against man. They were brutal confrontations between human will and the raw, untamed power of nature itself. These bloody spectacles, known as venations, were not simply acts of entertainment. They were elaborate hunts staged before thousands, where gladiators, or more precisely venatores, were forced to face off against lions, tigers, bears, elephants, and other wild, often exotic beasts brought into Rome from the farthest corners of the empire. To the Roman audience, every clash between man and beast wasn't just a thrilling encounter, but a symbolic assertion of control, proof that the empire could conquer not only lands and people, but nature itself, chaos itself. While some venatores received specialized training and learned to wield nets, spears, or traps, many were simply condemned men, slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war, thrown into the arena with little more than desperation to protect them from animals that knew nothing of mercy. It was rarely a fair fight, but for the crowd, it was a visceral performance, one that stirred both awe and fear. The fall of a great beast was celebrated as a triumph of civilization over savagery, and when the gladiator fell, his death became just another moment in the theater of blood. By parading beasts from distant lands into the arena, Rome didn't just entertain. It showcased its power over the unknown, over distant worlds, over the very forces of nature. Each animal was a symbol of something foreign, something feared. Each man who faced them represented Roman strength. And when he emerged victorious, the city roared, not just for the fight, but for the illusion that Rome itself had mastered the wild. But when the Venator lost, the silence was brief and quickly drowned in the anticipation of the next kill. Their names have been forgotten, their bones turned to dust beneath the sand, but their struggle still whispers beneath the stones of the Colosseum. Not every gladiator fought in the same way. There were different types, each with their own style, weapons, and rituals. The Murmillo, heavily armed, with a large shield and a helmet with a fish-shaped crest. Powerful, but slow. The Thraex, with a curved sword and small shield. Quick, agile, and trained to disrupt larger opponents. Then there was the Retiarius, the fisherman fighter. No helmet, only a net, a trident, and pure speed. His counterpart, the Secutor, a smooth helmet with no angles, specially designed not to get tangled. Each combination, carefully chosen, so that the crowd would get a spectacle. Balance, tension, blood. Although most gladiators were men, there were also women, gladiatrices, rare, yet present. Their appearance in the arena was no ordinary sight. It was an exotic spectacle, something that made the crowd both wary and fascinated. Female gladiators were presented as sensations, as something extraordinary. But their fights, they were no different from those of their male counterparts. Female gladiators fought, usually for the eyes of the crowd, for their amusement, but for many, it was not a choice. They were forced, slaves, women of low status, trapped in the web of violence. Some may have fought for glory, but for most, it was a fight for survival. There are accounts of female gladiators who became famous for their courage, their skill, their stories, often lost, fading in the shadow of time, muffled by the legends of their male counterparts, because in those times, women were rarely found on such violent stages, but the presence of these women in the arena was a shock to the norms of that time, a deviation from the expectation, and yet, for those women, the arena was their world, and their fate went relentlessly on in blood and sand. Soft breathing, the rustling of sand. A metal helmet slowly slides across stone. Every gladiator knew it, from the first day, that his story would end in blood. Not if, but when. Freedom was painted as a promise, a shadow on the horizon, a rudis, a wooden sword, a symbol of liberation, a gift from the emperor, or the people. But only a few ever held that sword. Most only saw the iron tip of an enemy's gladius. Sometimes there was a drum roll. The doors opened, the crowd roared, the sun burned on their backs, and there he stood again, halfway across the arena, the face of a man, in the eyes of a monster, and death was inevitable. Still, some fought until their last breath, until the final strike, for their name, for their story, for the illusion of freedom. The stories of gladiators have been passed down in stone and script, their victories and pain becoming legend. But who they truly were often fades into the shadow of the spectacle. The reality was harsh. Their fights symbolized a society built on power and control. For the crowd, they were entertainment. For the elite, a message, and for the gladiators themselves, a struggle for survival. Their legacy lives on in art, poetry, and memory. But what remains has faded. The myth is greater than the man, yet they endure, in our minds, in the echo of the arena. Gladiators were not just fighters. They were symbols of power, survival, and sacrifice. Their battles echoed beyond the sand of the arena, shaping the culture, politics, and soul of ancient Rome. Even now, their legacy endures, in stone, in stories, and in how we remember strength. So as you slowly drift into the quiet of the night, let their footsteps fade into the sand, and their stories whisper through your dreams. Sleep peacefully, and remember, the echoes of the arena still live on. Good night, and sleep tight.